quality mark for part 2. This is the one that we want to focus on the early years. So it's the first part. It's the first part of the training where we really get down into the nitty-gritty of the curriculum. So let's get talking about EYFS. So as we've said, the primary curriculum quality mark is going to help you to check that the whole of your curriculum is connected, and we see the crucial starting point for that is in the early years. And you'll have seen already this diagram that Ofsted have shared for a number of years, which is where they really sort of just try to get across that the curriculum is the progression model. And so with this curriculum, what we need to ensure is that our curriculum starts, and all staff are clear, that all teachers, that it starts in early years, that it needs to be connected from this point, and that knowledge and skills are at the heart of the curriculum for all subjects, and that those subjects build from the early years step by step as children progress through the school. As we move forward, we know, and we think more particularly about the early years, we know that there are 7 areas of learning. They're at the centre, at the core of the early years. But we also know that all core and foundation subjects start in the early years foundation stage. So all of those core subjects that we think of more specifically as maths and English and science start in the early years, as well as the history, geography, etc., which are all form that sort of knowledge and understanding of the world. And colleagues will be very confident, we're absolutely sure, of how those early starting points in that 7 areas of learning then go on to progress into the Key Stage 1 subjects and then into the Key Stage 2 subjects. But it's essential that we do, and our curriculums do reflect that, and that it's clear in the school's intended curriculum that the starting point is the early years. And there's an example here that I've included on the screen, and this is a component from art. And it's where one school has thought very clearly about the painting component of their art curriculum. And this school has nursery as well as reception. So it isn't just that reception is the starting point for this school. The foundation EY1, that nursery curriculum is the foundation for this school. So nursery as well as reception are highlighted on this school's intended curriculum for art. And you can see that linked very carefully on the screen. And what's also really key on here, and we're going to be picking up on this a lot as we go through the session today, is that the key vocabulary that children are expected to know and remember is also included on this progression document. Don, anything to add on that?
Just that those areas of learning, it goes into that curriculum for Key Stage 1, and the diagram's really helpful because it shows you those steps. It has to be that planned curriculum for each age group, and it has to be clearly connected.
Yeah, and we know, don't we, Don, as well, that the early years curriculum, will also provide provision that stimulates with experiences that will support children's development in all of those areas as well. For example, children learning to listen and follow directions, play and learn with other children and develop independence and the ability to sustain interest and focus. All of those key aspects are woven into it and are crucial too. So I guess what we're saying, isn't it, is that when we're reviewing the early years curriculum, our main focus is ensuring that we're providing children with that very best start in life. And we know that phrase, the best start in life, is increasingly being used by Ofsted, and research that's out there has been so crucial for our early years foundation stages. But we know at this time, the early years faces increasing challenges, Don, doesn't it? So I'm just going to ask you just to talk through these challenges. I've highlighted a few things that here on the slide for colleagues to reflect on, but there are, as everybody knows, lots of challenges at the moment.
Yes, and the personal development, as you were saying, is really crucial for early years. Establishing that as you went through all those things that would be needed. But when we're looking at where we are now, the early years has had the greatest sort of challenges regarding COVID, as is mentioned here, and that really has been periods where children were more isolated, didn't get the contact and get the language work of people talking to them during that period. And it seems to, the effects of it, we could see there would be difficulties, but I would say research is showing that it's much more than even we thought at the time, and that children are coming in where they've missed out those experiences, and as a result are less prepared for starting in early years. And we know all the issues regarding increasing numbers of children as well who are still wearing nappies when they're coming into early years. So getting it right, getting the curriculum right for those children, and it will still be including the reception children for this year. So it's still those, it's COVID's now seems a little bit in the past, but it's still really important. It's the children that have had the most impact on, and that really is a challenge for all early years for those children, those that have suffered more by what went on in their own circumstances during COVID. So I think really important.
And you've included here, Don, as well, a quote from Julian Grenier, and we're going to pick up on his work more as we talk through this session, because we really do feel that's vital that colleagues have some exposure to the work that he's done if they haven't already. And there's this quote that you've included here, which is EYFS children need to see themselves in their early year setting, but also should have windows that show exciting things in the wider world. I just wondered if you could just sum up.
Yes, I think I do think it's a quote we'll be coming back to as well as we're looking at other things in early years. But coming to your setting as an early years child, it is, you have to see that you see examples of who you are coming into that and the people that you're with. But those windows, using those windows as the view outside beyond the setting, is going to open up these visions for them and experiences of other, stimulating things that exist in the world. So there's those two sides to it that is really important, that those children feel part of the setting they've gone to and can see themselves in that setting with other children to learn, as well as those horizons we want to show them that are out there are things they will discover in their learning going forward.
Great, thanks, Don. So we know that what's really coming through strongly is that a strong communication and language strategy is vital in early years. It has always been the case, but none more so than what the challenges that schools are facing now, as with the new cohorts of children coming into their early years settings and reception classes. And this has been sort of discussed over the last few years, and as part of the primary curriculum quality mark, Don, we've identified, haven't we, 4 sort of key webinars really that we think are particularly helpful for colleagues. And we know that these are kind of bite-sized ones. They're about 15 minutes each. We've made sure that they're linked onto the primary curriculum quality mark web page, so colleagues can just access these on there. You'll see them as these sort of 4 icons, and when you open one up, you'll see that they're led by Phil Minns, who's a senior HMI for Ofsted on the curriculum and early years side of the work of Ofsted. And he also brings into some of these sessions Kirsty Godfrey, that many of us are aware of as well. So there's some really good stuff on there. But as we say, they're about 15 minutes, so they're quite useful. And we hope that colleagues will be able to have a look at these as a staff team, or to take time to look at them independently. They're not too long, so we'd hope that they could be woven into part of the programme this term. Don, do you want to add anything else on those?
Just those two people you mentioned who are on these bite-sized 15-minute sessions are immersed in early years, and very experienced in early years. And I just think all those bite-sized have got, there's some really good things that are covered on that about communication and language, and how it has to be built, and that it is so crucial for children starting in early years, that is going to be so important for them to, you know, get confidence and develop their language and the communication.
And what we see on those film clips as well are examples, don't we? So they go out, they use some shorter clips as well from actually in settings to demonstrate and provide examples of what they're talking about, which is really, really, really useful. So we know that children have variable language skills when they enter early years, and hence the new really strong focus on oracy. It's why our curriculum for communication and language must be ambitious. And I think what's really important around this is remembering that we need to unpick, when children start with us, what their starting point is for oracy. What are they understanding? Because the repercussions of this are quite far-reaching in terms of getting the starting points right for the curriculum that we're going to be providing in our settings, and that can mean a shift in the books that we might use. So one of the aspects I've talked with Don about is, you know, what comes through is we make assumptions about books that children will be ready to be to hear and to be read to them, but actually if they haven't got the basic understanding of the language that's going to be read to them, then what are they going to take out from that story? So again, it's crucial, but it is crucial alongside that we are ambitious and that there's a planned approach to the selection of reading books, to the introduction of key language and sentence structures that we're going to be enabling children to learn as they're in our settings. Something that's really important to remember, Don's touched on this, is that children who have difficulties with language in early years are 6 times more likely to have problems with learning in their later stages of education. There's a lot of research that's out at the moment. I know the EYF have a lot of statistics on this too, and a lot of the work that Ofsted are referring to and the research that they're working from is based on some of that EYF data that's out there. So this notion of 6 times more likely is something that we really need to be focused on, and it's why we must be ambitious, and it's why we have a duty to address language very quickly. So a key question for us to think about at this time is this a priority in your school? Is this a priority for you as a team when you're doing this first part of self-evaluating, thinking about how often do we talk about communication and language, and have we moved forward with the oracy, and are we thinking about that through everything that we do? So as I shared right at the beginning, the small section from the progression document where vocabulary was highlighted, do we have that key vocabulary, just the small amounts of vocabulary that we're teaching children in small steps that's ambitious alongside the curriculum that we're teaching them? Have we got the deliberate intentions to do that? The 4 bite-sized sessions, they'll summarize a lot of those principles, and as we've already said, they're really good length for staff meetings, so please do have a look at those and think about how you can weave them into this work that you're doing through the curriculum quality mark. I touched then a little bit, just thinking around some of those aspects. Don, we're highlighting here as well that EYFS, it needs to have lots of routines. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about this as well from the research?
Yes, it's really important that when we're looking at things, that there will be lots of routines and instruction that's going to happen, and that needs to be planned, and it needs to be, you know, that children will, you know, that you're watching for children's development of learning to follow instructions, play with others, sustain their interest when they're learning. And there are all those aspects that are a key part and always will be a key part of the provision that you have in early years. And just linking back, Joe, to the previous slide, there is that aspect of, if I go back 10 years ago, certainly in early years, there was a lot often said in North Yorkshire about the readiness of children to start particular learning. And there is obviously there is a danger with that. And in the curriculum we're talking about today, that when you say waiting for a child that's not ready yet, it can't be that they're waiting and then they suddenly find that that they're behind, and then that causes all the problems that we mentioned earlier on, 6 times more likely to have learning difficulties. So it's meeting the needs. That progression model is what do those children need, that the steps before, those early steps that are going to help them, and making sure it's in clear small steps that are connected.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, Don. And I know that often what we might hear, particularly at this time of year, as you're saying in our reception classes, is not ready. And we might see children on the fringes of activities, and those children who are, who perhaps don't join in with some things, and we might hear colleagues saying, "Oh, they're just not ready to join in, so we're just letting them get used to the environment." That has to be time limited, that kind of attitude, doesn't it? It's fair enough to have a little bit of time to get used to the environment, but given a bit like how we've moved forward with phonics, after the first week, we should be really trying to be focused on that. What is their starting point? Have we assessed it? And what are we going to do as practitioners to develop further and move those children on, so that they do start to socialize? What can we put in place so that they do start to hold conversations? And we're going to build here, aren't we, Don? And it's kind of linking us into what's really crucial is that high quality interaction from adults. It's vital in every aspect of the school day. If children are going to embed and deepen and develop their language, we need to ensure that we don't leave children on the fringes. We don't leave things to chance, that we are very focused on and giving this offer to all, and so that all children are interacting with adults, and all children are being encouraged to interact with each other, so that they get that opportunity for conversation and communication too. So I mentioned before, and we've mentioned Julian Grenier. He's done some really, really great work, hasn't he? And he has really strong insights. We know he's a well-known expert. We really endorse a film clip, a session that we've put onto the website under the early years section. It's called Putting the EYFS Curriculum into Practice. It links with a book that he's written as well with some of his colleagues. It's not just all content from him, from researchers that he works alongside. This presentation is really, really strong. It's got lots of key messages in, and we think that it would really add to colleagues' thinking around early years. Don, do you want to just say a little bit more about it here?
Yeah, I mean, no, it is excellent, and you can get those things that are on the video, which I presume is the YouTube, that will tell you how many minutes in. So it is something, again, it's a fairly long video, but you could, again, for staff meetings, take different sections, and it gives you those lists of what, when you've got now often on YouTube, at so many minutes, this is what's being covered, and then so on and so on going through. So you could choose things from it and do it in small steps.
So there's a few just key takeaways at this point, Don, just before we move on then. So a few things that we really want to reinforce. So firstly, half of disadvantaged children don't get a good level of development. As a result of this, we know that them 6 times more likely to struggle going forward, that it reduces their life chances, their chances of not only getting GCSEs, but also their future work life chances as well. So if we don't pick up on gaps in language development and communication, really what it's saying is a child will never recover from it. It's a hard fact, but the research is there. And I think that that's something morally that we need to really be thinking about, because that doesn't sit well with us as primary and early years practitioners. So we must ensure that what we're saying we're doing as we're developing our oracy progression documents, and we're all, thinking about language and communication, we must ensure particularly that staff in early years follow what's agreed as part of the whole school progression documents. That's really important. And one of the things that we do know is that adults will talk more to children who are good at talking, Don, though, don't we? So
yes, it's a thing that is often the case in the nature of provision in early years, and different activities going on with adults moving around and talking to children, but that those children that are the most confident and already articulate get more of the adult's time than those children that probably have got some emerging issues with their language and aspects of it. And so really it's making sure as a team and as all the adults involved that we know that naturally can happen, because those children are very talkative, but we've got to make sure that schools have their system in their teams that make sure we're prioritizing our time to those that need it. And I think particularly, Jo, around, you mentioned the disadvantaged number there, half of them don't get GLD, but it's still, was it for 2023, was it still 64%? There's still a large number of children are not getting GLD. And if they're not making that really strong start for communication and language, particularly, we're seeing that research would say it's going to be very hard to catch that up in the rest of the key stages.
Yeah, and there's so many times, isn't there, in the school day where we see the children who talk a lot dominating, and so strategies such as nomination, for example, at carpet time, are all really powerful to ensure that we're drawing in those children who are on the periphery, those children who are on the fringes, that we are addressing, and we're being deliberate. We have got that deliberate intention to speak to them, to ensure that we are engaging them in conversation. Don, the final one here, I think you mentioned a little bit around the word gap. We know that that's been interpreted in the wrong way. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a moment, but I don't know whether you want to add anything on there.
Yes, it was in the news, probably, wasn't it? Maybe particularly about 5 years ago, wasn't it, really, when it came out, that 30 million gap, and there was controversy, and still has been with it, really, that those children that have heard, experienced, that number, those children that have had that sort of support at home and conversations where they picked up those, those children have, 30 million words, and the gap is huge to those children that haven't had those experiences. And so that was something that came into play, and a lot of things were started to be done to try and address that and close the gap and provide for those children that had those gaps.
Great, thank you. Okay, so what we're saying then is that high quality interaction must be a priority for our early years children, and schools have to get it right by finding the most effective ways to meet their children's needs. And what we're alluding to here is that will change. Children's needs will change cohort on cohort. So that flexible approach to identifying children's starting points and being very deliberate with your intentions around how you are focused on that communication and language is just so important. So the importance of depth in communication and language is a priority, because on many occasions there's too much directive talk. If a child isn't having rich conversation to develop communication and language, this will restrict their development for learning. we know children's development is enhanced when teachers make high quality interaction a priority. However, we're often in a rush setting up, etc., rather than making time to prioritise the quality of interaction. So rich conversations make a huge difference to children's development of communication and language. And an interesting practice used in Julian Grenier's setting is providing children twice a week with discussions of stories that has planned high quality interaction aligned with it. So this is sensitive and stimulating with an adult or key person working with a small group of children. And there's something about that, Don, isn't there, that Julian really says is having a really powerful impact. He works in central London, doesn't he, and works with children in his setting who are quite deprived as well, and many that are disadvantaged. So this very tight focus around this twice a week discussion stories is he's saying having a really strong impact. I don't know if you want to share a little bit more with us on that.
Yes, it's that change from being the audience of a large group of children where they're listening to a story is making sure that you have a smaller group that can have those high quality discussions with an adult on the text, and it's making sure that they're trying to make sure that happens twice a week, isn't it? I think,
yeah.
Remembering,
yeah.
For that. So it's that is a key part to it, because as Joe's mentioned, there is the time can be lost. We know it. Teachers have so many things that happen each day they weren't expecting, that are going on in school, and things that are happening with children, that times you have plans and sometimes things will be missed and have to be missed. But it's this that shouldn't be. These sort of provision, the provision that is giving the opportunity for high quality interaction, has got to have that high focus. As Joe says, there is that the directional sort of communication, and follow, go, sit down, put coats on. There's lots of things and routines, direct routines that children need to do, and that's part of all of their personal development, that they have to be able to do that. But it's got to be, nothing should be more of a priority than this work on communication and language, and that interaction of quality.
Okay, so one of the support, sort of, a lot of research has gone into this. One of the methods for this that we'd really advocate is the EYFS Shrek approach. And if this is used consistently, then it will help, and it's used well by colleagues, it will really help to expand children's knowledge and communication and language. So if it supports children in responding to and following kind of the key sort of language structures, and it's based on taking the lead from the children and using verbal and non-verbal communication and responding, and how an adult then builds on that and expands the language that a child is using. You need to give children time to listen, process and reply, and repeat what the child says and build on it by adding more words to turn it into a sentence. And the research is there. It's something that schools are spending time focusing on, as staff teams looking into it. So I've got you the model on there. Many of you will have heard of it already, but it's a really powerful tool to really strip back and start to think about, are our adult communications interactions of a high enough quality? I think we might think we're quite good at doing them, but this approach really does help us to think about sharing attention with the child, responding, expanding, and then getting into that two-way conversation that flows. And we probably don't have enough of that. And I think the thing with this, Don, as well, is it's really powerful for not just our EYFS colleagues, but also for all colleagues in school, to improve the quality, because obviously, as we know, we've got children with communication and language difficulties at every stage of in every phase of the primary in the primary years. So it's a powerful thing for all staff, support assistants and teaching assistants to really focus on. I think and we've included some of the resources within our primary curriculum quality mark pages, haven't we, on the website as well, to help staff get to it quickly.
I think as well, Joy, it's a systematic approach, really, isn't it? If you think about it, and we know that things that become more random or of choice, or that structure is going to have an impact. So I think that's a key part. And it's then training staff once it's agreed its use, but it has to be such a priority that it's a great opportunity for schools to use something that will give that systematic approach and make sure this area is prioritized.
Yeah, and I think for colleagues where sometimes some may lack confidence in whether they are doing the right thing to develop children's communication and language, it gives just what you've said, systematic approach and a structure to work from, that we can all learn from and improve what we're doing. So that resources for that, we'd recommend have a look at that as part of this term's work as a team of staff, and be thinking about applying that approach. So we talked about that word gap, a little bit more here on the slide about the 30 million word gap for disadvantaged children. It's often been taken negatively and forgotten how much all children bring to learning. And sometimes it's felt like providing more word lists, but it's not that, is it, Don? And you mentioned a little bit, it isn't that. It's around the conversation. Yeah.
It's this research of Rachel Romeo in America using scanners with lots of children, and that it's sort of showing that isn't the gap, it is the actual conversations and the interaction. It's not the words themselves, this 30 million gap, which we talked about earlier. It is the interaction, and there is the evidence that that's the case. And the other powerful sort of aspect of that research, if you think back to the 30 million gap, it was seen often to be a proxy for children's ability, and it was also thought by many that it would be linked to those more fortunate children with conversations. And the research not only shows that it's not to do with the vocabulary, it's the interaction and using and embedding the language, and that there is no link with the education level that the parents went to. There is no link with that the thing that was important, it didn't matter of socioeconomic factors, it was the interactions that took place.
Absolutely. And again, that's, as we've said, it's discussed on Julian Grenier's film clip that we've included in the sort of the toolkit for the early years. So you'll hear lots more about it on there. It's fascinating, and I think it gives us a lot more context around that. It's really, really useful. Thanks, Don. So as Don's sort of saying, research we know is hugely important. It's also important for us to know that changes. But from what we've gathered from research recently, what do we know works best for children's learning, and particularly when we're thinking of how we apply this to our early years children? So we must remember research evidence is not fixed. That things change and people find out new things, and they refine the research and drill further down into it. But what is important is that any research that we're using is based on evidence, because what we need to be able to see from that evidence-based research is the impact, and it's the impact that's the priority. So what we know, for example, is it's not lists of words that are vital for children, but instead it's that high quality conversations that truly embed and deepen children's language development. And I know I've spoken before to colleagues about how when we introduce a new word, or we are doing our shared reading with children and we've highlighted some new vocabulary, and then perhaps we talk with the children about that vocabulary, that we don't just leave it there. We may read the book several times and come back to that new word in the context of the book. But to really deepen children's knowledge and embed it for children, we need to use that word that we've introduced in another context, in another conversation, aside from that book. So planning and being really clear on what new vocabulary are we teaching to our early years class this week, today, this month, for etc. And making sure that all adults know that vocabulary so that we can engage children in conversation using that vocabulary in different contexts. That gives them the chance to try it out, for us to explain and for us to apply it in different contexts so that it will then truly embed and deepen their thinking and their language development. So reading to or reading with children benefits from a dialogical approach. So Don, just tell us a little bit more about that one.
I think that links with Julian Grenier's his groups for reading, doesn't it? In that sense, that it's the quality of the talk, and that's a crucial thing, and that's got to start. And those dialogic methods of asking questions are a critical part of it. So you can see that just follows on, and also the oracy, which we're going to, mentioning as well, is been a neglected area, hasn't it? Really, we've talked about it, but the new curriculum hasn't put it in a high profile, even though it lies behind a lot of the learning strategies that are most effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And there are some other points there which we've covered. So we know the evidence-based research enables us to provide learning that helps children to achieve the best they can, and that a lot of that is available, particularly around the early years, is available in the EF toolkit. So we've included some of that in our resources too. And professional development is obviously vital to help us as practitioners to adopt the agreed most effective teaching strategies. And it's why this is crucial that it's not just the early years practitioners who are looking at this time, but it's all of us as practitioners, because what's probably right for the early years will have lots of benefits for children in other areas of primary school too. So adopting new strategies, agreeing them as a staff team as to why they're effective, and how they could enhance what we're doing is really important for all of us. Equalities are a vital part of research. Brains are built. And I like this last one. So lots of money on your building will have zero impact on children's learning, Don. So
that's Julian Grenier.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Let's just keep going. So considering what we now know about the essential EYFS provision that has the most impact on children's learning and development, leaders must identify the teaching strategies, planning and provision that will have the most impact on children's growth, development and learning. So it's that holistic approach, so important around their personal development alongside their learning too. So it's important to have a planned and balanced curriculum that will meet all children's needs, and that in the early years will change a little bit every year, won't it? Because of the new children that you're teaching, their needs will be different. So having that adaptive approach at the start is really important. Children's personal, social and emotional development remains a really key aspect. For example, children need to learn to listen, follow instructions, tidy up, learn to play with other children, sustain interest and concentration, be curious and stimulated by their learning provision. And we know that this, particularly for in all settings, but particularly for many of our schools where children are not coming from natural feeder nursery provision, where we may have children coming to us that have been in a wide range of different early year settings prior to their reception year, for example. I know in some of our small schools we can have cohorts of 15 and the majority of them have all come from separate settings. So in the first few weeks when we bring those children together, establishing lots of those things are absolutely vital and crucial, and a lot of time needs to be invested in them, because that will reap the the rewards. Children need to apply those the working memory strategies, the cognitive science. It's practice, 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 keeping focused on small amounts of new things, and building on that carefully will enable children to develop stronger personal, social, and emotional development. We need to remember to connect learning that builds in small steps, ensuring that progression. And we need to ensure that rich language experiences are part of it, so that sharing of high quality books, the rhymes and the songs. And that needs to be planned, and colleagues need to have deliberate intentions. So for example, it's a question we might think that going on a bear hunt, that the children are ready for when they first come into the classroom. But if they're not ready with that language, with the prepositional language that's used in that book, then maybe it's too soon. And maybe we might have children that miss what that's really meaning. So making sure that we don't make assumptions, that we adapt the books that we're going to use, thinking about what have I learned about my children today? Are they ready for this book? And if they're not ready for this book, then make sure we get a book which is meeting their language requirements and needs at that time. So planned phonics in small steps following the school's chosen systematic synthetic phonics programme with small groups should be established really early on in the reception year, and it's having that flexible approach to it. So fidelity doesn't mean all children doing the same thing at all times. Fidelity means following the scheme but adjusting that for different groups of children. So we may have all of the children starting off on phonics together, but then it quickly becomes apparent that they're at different stages, and then some may need more practice, etc. So that's important that we do that, and we may need to take children into small groups that meet their needs, but they're working through the scheme and we're showing fidelity to it. And we also need to make sure that planned high quality conversations with all children ensure deep embedded vocabulary. So thinking about the story time particularly is a really key starting point. Are all children ready for the same book? Or do we need to have two different groups going on with support assistant, with the class teacher, that may be reading slightly different stories at story time that are more appropriate for this stage that the child is at and meeting their needs? Don, anything to add on that one?
Again, just on the last one there, it's making time for the high quality, and all the other things are needed. It's part of the personal development and learning for early years children, but that any loss of time, we can't afford it to, take that time away from these high quality interactions. And the other thing was, when just looking at research and mentioning that, there's been a lot of research around now for a long period of time, but what happened often was that people would take any research that had shown some impact and adopt that and in the educational world, whereas what we're finding now that has changed and influenced the introduction of the new curriculum is it's really looking at the research that really shows significant impact. That is going to be make a real significant change for the learning for children, and that's a really important thing to remember. These are the things that make the biggest difference, and that is what we need to do in education, is to focus on that, so that we're doing everything so that those gaps are addressed for children, and we want to get children off to a flying start that can then be built on as they move through the school.
Great, thank you. So this next slide, I think that's the right one. Yeah, the next slide I think is we're thinking about sort of some of the key aspects, but then linking a little bit further, this important priority, making sure those high quality interactions have a priority over other early years provision is really important. So remember, adults often talk more, we said at the beginning, to children who are good at speaking, and how do you turn that around?
Yeah.
So, Don, do you want to just pick up on these points on this slide then? Because I know we've talked and we talked about it this week. So about the executive function particularly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think on what you just said there, it really is a challenge for schools to really think of a plan that's going to make sure that those priorities there is time for that focus, and that's going to make a key difference really, if we can do that, so that that important time isn't lost, and we know that that's hopefully going to improve the communication and language for many early years children. And Joe, and then referring to the next section is on those three areas for children. Behaviour has been one of the things with COVID, I feel, hasn't it? That there's, as we mentioned right at the very beginning, so there are three areas there of, working memory is clearly one that's been overloaded, and it's the behaviour of children not being able to, often their learning behaviours are more difficult to develop, so a greater focus on how the children, that communication, that they need to be listening and concentrating. And then the third one is around making those important connections. So you're looking at 3 steps here, aren't you? 3 different steps, but they're really trying to help early years children and to help teachers with developments to help that be planned for schools. And that, I know that's something, Joe, we will be doing more of.
Yeah.
On what that will look like going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
But do you want to add more on that, Joe?
No, I just think that we've just highlighted there. It's as you've said, it's something that we really need to start to think about, this executive function, and just breaking it down into its 3 parts. And the work that we're doing at the moment around oracy will be supporting having a more deliberate approach to developing effective listening for children, how we support them in not being distracted and from cutting out the distractions. And as Don said, then the other 2 parts, and yeah, more we'll talk more on this as we go on. So yeah, but what we do know is that the video that we've included in the resources from Julian Grenier does give lots of good examples of high quality adult interactions. And there are also other links on there to videos as well that demonstrate that too. So just a really important aspect for colleagues to look at. So we've mentioned as well around what Julian says about the importance of children discussing storybooks in smaller groups rather than children being the audience in a large group while a book is read to them. As a result of this, his school, as we've said, now ensures that children receive at least 2 small group discussions with the book each week. And he states that that's a key non-negotiable. And it may be in your early years classrooms that you have something similar. It might be shared reading time. It could be part of your how you support the children in developing that reading comprehension alongside the work that you do with the SSP. But what we would suggest as well as part of this term is just review and revisit it. So review and revisit your grouping arrangements and that time allocation that's given for those sessions, just to make sure that they are really focused on high quality interaction with the children based on their starting points and their needs, because there could be ways that you could improve the impact in your provision and your teaching arrangements. So that's something that we'd really like people to review and just evaluate as well as part of this work. And finally, we just come to this slide, which just pulls together. We've talked about oracy, something that's particularly important, as Don said, hasn't been focused on enough, and Ofsted have highlighted that in their research review, their English subject review report. Asquith Primary School have provided examples of initial planning, and they did this for at a meeting of YCAT schools, and we've also shared it with Heart members as well, with our Heart leaders too. And there are some details on here of the physical requirements of RSE in the early years, and these were provided at the meeting. The full document is available within the resources on the Primary Curriculum Quality Mark webpage as well, so there is access to the full document. And we've just pulled here around the physical requirements of RSE in early years. So the first kind of bullet points there, they're quite straightforward for colleagues to read, but speak audibly so that they can be heard and understood by a peer or an adult. Obviously, the more adult interactions that happen in the classroom, the more able the children will be able to do that. Maintaining eye contact with a familiar adult is crucial. So again, that conversation, adults expanding talk for the child, encouraging that looking at each other and maintaining eye contact. So looking at who's talking and who's been spoken to, and using gestures to support delivery of talk. For example, nodding and pointing so that you are showing and developing children's ability to participate in conversation, and some of the social norms around that, and how you show to somebody that you are listening and you are interested in what they're saying. And there are other aspects that are also included in the RSE document. So knowing the linguistic requirements for RSE, the cognitive requirements for RSE, and the social and emotional requirements for RSE too. They're all available in that document and are there as really good starting points for our early years colleagues and all staff across school to reflect on and to think about, are they the right starting points for your school? And if helpful, to use that as a draft document that then you can edit and work on as a team to get this really right for the children in your setting. Don, anything else to add at that point?
Yeah. Just planning. I think it's really a key takeaway is to plan the non-negotiables that you want, those that will need to have a greater priority, as we're saying, and then the timings and how those will be grouped and so that they're going to be really effective will be a key part of that for schools. So I think that's it. At this time of the year, it's a good time to actually look at that again and to make sure that you're planning the right priorities are being planned, and their time allocations and the arrangements in school to make them work. And then, of course, finally, every adult is following it as agreed, so that some in-house training yourselves just to check that that's how it will look and that's how it's going to work.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Don. So that brings us to the end of this session. So for colleagues at this point, these are the crucial sort of key messages around EYFS that we've shared with you this afternoon. This focus threads through every aspect of the work in early years, through the early English, through the early maths, through all of the work in the seven key areas. And we would suggest now that you then have a look at the resources, work with those resources, filter things into staff meetings, and have some discussions as a team around the key kind of messages that we've shared with you. We're going to be pulling together another short session for colleagues to be able to access at the right time for your team, which will be where we share with you the actual early years self-evaluation document. So we want to give you time to be able to really think about your current practice and reflect on it before we share that document with you. So that document will be ready towards the end of next week, and it will be posted onto the Primary Curriculum Quality Mark webpage. And alongside that, there'll be another short film clip, a lot shorter than this, where we'll just go through the document and provide you with some some support and more information on the kind of information that you would be referring to in terms of the evidence that you might be collecting around some key self-evaluative questions to help you review and evaluate the practice over this term, and think about those areas for improvement that you might identify as a result of that work. Okay, so we hope you found this useful. Please do, as ever, make contact with us if there's anything that you would seek a little bit of further clarification on. This recording will be posted on the Primary Curriculum Quality Mark website too, so that you can access it again, and it will remain on there. It won't go, so you'll be able to look at it if you want to just reflect on anything. And alongside that, there will be a short notebook that includes all of the information on the slides that we've shared, so that you'll be able to download that and have a look at that as well if there's anything particular that you want to remember. Okay, so Don, I think that's everything from me. Is there any last messages from yourself?
No, that's it.
Sure, okay,
thank you.
So we'll say thank you very much, and yeah, that's the end of this session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I've stopped.